While the apparently less strong proposition, there is at least one man who exists, or some men exist, implies their existence. Lacan draws from this the conclusion that we pass from universal proposition, which only defines the content of a notion, to existence only through a proposition stating the existence of at least one, which is an exception to the universality in question. What this means with regard to love is that the universal proposition, I love you all, acquires the level of actual existence only if there is at least one whom I hate. That this is abundantly confirmed by the fact that the universal love for humanity always led to the brutal hatred of the actually existing exception, of the enemies of humanity. This hatred of the exception is the truth of universal love. In contrast to true love, which can only emerge against the background, not of universal hatred, relationship is here asymmetrical, but of universal indifference. I am indifferent towards all, the totality of the universe, and as such, I actually love you, the unique individual who sticks out against this indifferent background. Love and hatred are thus not symmetrical. Love emerges out of the universal indifference, while hatred emerges out of universal love. In short, we are dealing here with what Lacan called the formulas of sexuation. I do not love you all is the only foundation of there is nobody that I do not love, while I love you all necessarily relies on I really hate some of you. But I love you all, as we probably know, defended himself Erich Mielke, the secret police boss of the German Democratic Republic. Remember, in the last days of DDR, when he was attacked by critical members of the party, he made this Ceausescu gesture, but I love you all. I think this was not irony. It has to be taken literally. I love you all is the universal proposition which grounded his hatred of the enemies of socialism. This brings us to the radical anti-Levinasian conclusion. The true ethical step is the one beyond the face of the other, the one of suspending the hold of this face, the choice against the face for the third. This coldness is justice at its most elementary. Every preempting of the other in the guise of his face relegates the third to the faceless background. And the elementary gesture of justice is not to show respect for the face in front of you, to be open for its depth and so on, but to abstract from it and refocus onto the faceless thirds in the background. It is only such a shift of focus onto the third which effectively uproots justice, liberating it from the contingent umbilical link that renders her embedded in a particular situation. In other words, it is only such a shift onto the third that grounds justice in the dimension of its proper true universality. When Levinas endeavors to ground ethics in the other's face, is he not still clinging to the ultimate root of all ethical commitment? Is he not still afraid to accept the abyss of the rootless law as the only foundation of ethics? Justice as blind thus means that precisely it cannot be grounded in the relationship to others' face. And this structure, I think, is irreducible. It is not that while in our empirical lives the third is irreducible, we should maintain as a kind of Kantian regulative idea the full grounding of ethics in the relationship to the other's face. Such a grounding is not only empirically impossible, it is a priori impossible, since the limitation of our capacity to relate to others' faces is the mark of our very finitude. In other words, the limitation of our ethical relation of responsibility towards the other's face, which necessitates the rise of the third, the domain of regulation, is a positive condition of ethics. If we deny this, if we stick to the postulate of a final translatability of the third into a relation to others' face, we remain caught in understanding. One can understand everything. Even the most hideous crime has an inner truth and beauty when observed from within. Recall the refined spiritual meditation of Japanese warriors. And I'm sure, for example, one can understand Heydrich. He would say, but you don't understand anything about my deep inner experience of playing in the evenings Beethoven string quartets and so on and so on. This is what the ethical law prohibits. Justice has to ignore the so-called inner truth. Recall the famous passage from Graham Greene's The Power and the Glory. Quote, when you visualized a man or woman carefully, you could always begin to feel pity. That was a quality God's image carried with us. When you saw the lines at the corner of the eyes, the shape of the mouth, how their hair grew, it was impossible to hate. Hate is just a failure of imagination. I don't know how Graham Greene meant it, but my conclusion is, in order to practice justice, one has to suspend one's power of imagination. So back to Levinas. I think that the limitation of Levinas is not simply that of a Eurocentrist who relies on a too narrow definition of what is human, a definition that secretly excludes non-Europeans as not fully human. If anything, I think I almost sympathize with Levinas when he openly acknowledged his Eurocentric bias. For example, in a wonderful, strange text, he reports on how our time is marked by, quote, the arrival on the historical scene of those underdeveloped Afro-Asiatic masses that are strangers to the sacred history that forms the heart of the Judaic-Christian world, and so on. So, even in one text, very significant text from 1960 about the philosophical background of the Chinese-Soviet political strife, he even openly says that Chinese are not our neighbors, emphatically. It's a different attitude. And for me, that's not the problem. What Levinas fails to include into the scope of human is rather the inhuman itself, a dimension which eludes the face-to-face relationship of humans. Recall here, at a different level, Theodor Adorno's ambiguity with regard to the inhuman. While Adorno is well aware of the violence involved in the predominant definition of what counts as human, the implied exclusion of whole dimensions as non-human, he nonetheless basically conceives inhuman as the depository of alienated humanity. Ultimately, for Adorno, inhuman is the power of barbarism we have to fight. Now, what Adorno failed to render thematic, I claim, is, as it were, the positive dimension of the inhuman, which I think this positive dimension was first indicated, even conceptualized, in the changed status of the inhuman in Kantian transcendental terms. Kant introduced a key distinction between negative and, in his critique of pure reason, negative and indefinite judgment. For example, the positive judgment, the soul is mortal, can be negated in two ways. When a predicate is denied to the subject, the soul is not mortal, and when it's not the predicate which is denied, but a non-predicate which is affirmed. Not the soul is not mortal, but the soul is non-mortal. The difference is exactly the same as the one known to every reader of Stephen King and other cheap horror writers between he is not dead and he is undead. The indefinite judgment, he is undead, opens up a third domain which undermines the underlying distinction. He is non-dead means simply he is alive. He is undead means he is alive precisely insofar as he is dead. The undead are neither alive nor dead. They are precisely the monstrous living dead. And I claim the same goes for inhuman. It's crucial to conceive of inhuman as a Kantian indefinite judgment. He is not human is not the same as he is inhuman. He is not human means simply he is external to humanity, animal, divine, whatever. While he is inhuman means something totally different. The fact that he is neither human nor inhuman, but marked by a terrifying excess which, although it negates what we understand as humanity, is inherent as an innermost possibility of being human. And perhaps one should reach the hypothesis that this is what changes with the Kantian philosophical revolution. In the pre-Kantian universe, humans were simply humans, beings of reason, fighting the excess of animal lusts or divine madness.